left the UK, I worked in an ex-mining community in the northeast of England. The mine closed in 1993 and left 2,000 people unemployed and devastated the community. And to this day, this community has not recovered. In the 2010 census, the Multiple Deprivation Index rated the school as being in the 4th percentile for employment. It rated the town as being in the 13th percentile for education and in the 15th percentile for crime. In other words, in this town, you were more likely to get a criminal record than you were to get a good education or a job. And I began working there in 2011 as a deputy head teacher. And the school that I worked in massively underserved their pupils. 47% of the pupils in that school at that time were leaving school without the basic requirements in reading, writing, and maths. That meant that more children were leaving without that than were. And when I talked to staff about why that was, they shrugged their shoulders and they said to me, "What can you expect from children around here?" And those children certainly were reveling in that cycle of low expectations, from the education that they were receiving right through to the jobs that they were not getting, and ultimately through to their hopes and aspirations for the future, or lack of. And so I spent my time working with the leadership team in the school and working with the community to raise those expectations. And by the time I left that school, those children were performing in line with and beyond the national average for reading, writing, and maths. And I learnt an important message. I learnt to always ask, what can you expect? Because what you expect is always what you will get. I now work in a large international school here in Guangzhou. We have 51 nationalities represented in the school, and the school is part of 41 schools globally, and our children network with 250,000 similarly minded international students. Our parents work for multi-global organizations and consulates. Our children truly are best placed to be the future leaders of tomorrow. And so I ask myself, what can I expect? Well, expectations at this school are pretty high, from the parents, from the school, and from the community. And so what I need to ask myself now is, how can I best serve those expectations? There's a list going around, doing the rounds of educational websites at the moment, of Fortune 500 companies and their list of desirable characteristics and attributes of their future employees. And the list is a comparison between 1970 and 1999. And we can clearly see that in 1970, ranked first, second, and third were writing, computing skills, and reading skills. Compare that to 1999, and the top 3 places are given to teamwork, problem solving, and interpersonal skills, with writing dropped right down into 10th place. And when I discussed this with some colleagues, there were cries of outrage at the loss of literacy in this technological age. Now, I don't agree with that, and I don't believe that this list denigrates the need for basic literacy. I don't think that Fortune 500 companies are going to have employees who are hell-bent on exposing us to communication through text talk, LOL. I just think that basic levels of literacy have become an expectation. After all, you don't go into a car showroom and ask the guy, "Excuse me, does this car come with wheels?" You look at variables on a high-end spec and you shop accordingly. And in education, it's time that we embrace this. It's time that we readdress that balance between the basics of reading, writing, and maths, and creating those opportunities for our children to develop their high-end spec of all of those higher level learning skills in order for them to compete in a busy marketplace in the future. So how do I do that? In my current setting, the curriculum is drawn from the UK. It's rigorous and challenging, but because we're not in the UK, we can tailor that curriculum to meet the needs of the children in front of us. We can match their interests and make it engaging, and we can try to fulfill the expectation that we will create the future leaders of tomorrow. Back in the UK, they're currently undergoing a curriculum and assessment review. The difficulties with the national curriculum in the UK were that it was simply too jam-packed with information and was fondly referred to as mile wide and centimetre deep, and did not allow children time to acquire deep understanding of the knowledge that they were being taught. And this was further compounded by an assessment system. In 1987, Professor Paul Black led a task team to review assessment systems in the UK. Prior to this, children in schools were awarded an arbitrary grade. For example, the letter C. And you could be C in your first year. You could be C in your second year. In fact, you could go the whole way through your school career and only ever be C. And you would never know if you had ever gotten any better at anything. And your parents would never know if you had ever made any progress. What Paul Black and his team did was devise a system of levels. And all of a sudden, teachers had this fantastic tool for measuring progress. So children could enter on a level 2. And the next year, they could be a level 3. And the next year, they could be a level 4. And the teachers, the children, and the parents would know that there had been progress in learning. They would know that the learning had moved on. But what happened to this system? Well, unfortunately, it was hijacked, and it was used as a means to measure effectiveness of schools and teachers. All of a sudden, schools were required to produce a certain percentage of children at level 4 and a certain percentage of children at level 5. And then that requirement was not enough. Schools were then being asked to push as many children as far up these levels as they possibly could. And we entered into a culture of speedy progress. And in this culture of speedy progress, non-stop moving through these scales of knowledge, careers were lost, jobs were lost, and the stakes became high. And as a consequence, knowledge in the curriculum became the champion, with the learning skills becoming a poor second cousin. So in my current school, I put together a team to look at challenging these difficulties, of creating a system that would allow children to acquire that definitely must-have basic knowledge, but that also give teachers the time and space to develop those higher order thinking skills. So we put together a set of age-related expectations, the basics, and we measure these within a 4-point scale. And the third point on the scale is when children are meeting their age-related expectations. Beyond that, we call it mastery level, and this is where it gets interesting. To be deemed to be performing at mastery level, you need to pull out a higher set of learning skills. You need to be collaborative and creative. You need to be able to transfer your learning across a range of contexts, and you need to be doing it independently. In other words, you need to be exhibiting those characteristics that Fortune 500 companies are looking for. And the impact of this will be immense. How will teachers assess this? Well, that will change everything. You cannot give children a test paper that measures how they creatively explore a concept. You cannot give them a test paper that measures deeper understanding beyond regurgitation. And so teachers will be forced to set up situations, practical situations where they are a part of assessment, not sitting next to assessment. And during those situations, they will question children, they will ask children about their understanding, and they will observe that in a range of context and become more creative in their practice as they chase this fourth point on the scale. So what will that look like in school? Well, let's compare the new assessment system to the old assessment system. And let me tell you about the last class I taught when I was in the UK. They were a very specific group of learners. And they were put together because they were deemed to be underperforming by 2 years behind their peers in their cohort. They had a host of specific learning difficulties, and something that they all had in common was that they had difficulties with language and processing. And when I received them as a class, I had to think very carefully and very creatively about how I would teach these children so that they could understand and so that they could catch up with their peers. Let's take, for example, maths. So, the age-related expectation is to be able to convert this improper fraction into a mixed number. Traditionally, with a normal group of learners, I would show them the process, which would be to divide the numerator by the denominator and express the remainder as a fraction. Or the inverse would be the other way around. But that is too much language. I could not present that to these children in a way that they would understand. But what I could do is use sandwiches. If I take 2 sandwiches and chop them up, while I'm working with those children, we can count the pieces, and we can express the pieces as a fraction. We can talk about how many whole sandwiches there are and how many bits of a sandwich there are. I can demonstrate in the middle of speaking to those children how to express that as a fraction, and we can talk about the numerator and we can talk about the denominator. And all of a sudden, I am part of assessment. I am exploring the deeper understanding of those children. And because I can do that, I'm not limited to presenting that to children in just one way. Let me tell you about John. John in the class was undergoing assessment for autism. And I discovered something about John with my sandwiches. I discovered that John did not like sandwiches. In fact, asking John to be near a sandwich was like asking someone to hug a nuclear device that was about to explode. But because I know John, and because I can change my assessment parameters, I can do something that will engage him and encourage him to approach the assessment. And I know that John loves Lego. In fact, John would sell his granny for a box of Lego. And so I can set up exactly the same concept using Lego, where I can bring John to engage with that, and I can discuss, and I can start to develop a deeper understanding of the concept. In the old system, the children would have received a test paper that looks like this. The children in that class would not have approached this. They would have passed it over as being too difficult for them. And I, as a teacher, would have received no information. And I would have assessed them as performing below their peers. But with sandwiches and Lego, I can start to say that learning may not be secure, but there is developing understanding of changing fractions into mixed numbers and improper fractions. And all of a sudden, I have more useful information to use. So we also had to consider how this would work for our better learners. In the old system, we would teach everything at level 3. So the children would go through this list. And in the name of challenge and speedy progress, we would move on to the higher list because it's harder and it's more challenging. But I had to stop and think, is more knowledge necessarily more challenge? And is it necessarily better progress? And in some situations, yes, it is. But I would enter into classrooms and observe teachers teaching challenging maths to top set children, where they had taken the next level beyond their age group and gone through those concepts. But I always left feeling unsatisfied, that actually the challenge only lasted up until the point where the children understood. And if you had a very good teacher, that challenge lasted for the duration of the lesson. But actually, what would have really challenged those children would be to approach a mathematical concept in a group of 6, to find 4 different ways of carrying out that concept, and to present their findings and their thinking and their reasoning to the rest of the class and persuade the class that their approach was the best. And by doing that, what we're asking children to do is access a range of higher level skills and behaviours. And the more opportunities we give children to practice those skills and those behaviours, the better they will become at using them. Whereas knowledge does not afford us such a benefit. The more times you use a fact does not make the fact any better. It's what we do with those facts and how we approach them that matters. So what will that look like? Well, in our new evaluation system, we will stop pushing up through these levels. We will teach the age-related expectations and we will pause, and then teachers will shift. They will begin to create all of those scenarios where children can be collaborating and learning together, where they can be reasoning and presenting, where they can start to acquire all of those skills that will now be explicitly taught rather than maybe caught in a classroom setting. And this will change teaching practice in schools because teachers will no longer be over-reliant on talking at children. And classrooms will become busier, noisier, more collaborative places full of sandwiches and Lego. And so I go back to the benefit. Well, the system, it benefits everybody. It provides children with those basic expectations, those things that they must have before they leave school. It provides them with the opportunity to act in different ways in the classroom and develop those skills to become Fortune 500 employees and future leaders. And it benefits teachers because all of a sudden, teachers have the green light. They can carry out activities in their classroom that they know will benefit their children, and they can start to build a bigger range of evidence in which to assess them, and everyone will be more successful. So what can we expect? Well, at my current school, we can expect to see a fulfillment of our promise to expose our children to a world-class curriculum and create a lifelong love of learning to prepare them for the future and to be the global leaders of tomorrow. Thank you very much.